I wanted to basically say a few remarks. We've met most of the commentary and the panelists over the last few days. We've been talking so much about U.S. domestic politics, but there's a lot, as we all know, going on around the world. And in many ways, there are some of the same dynamics that we have seen in our own country, an anti-establishment mood and a discontent with traditional political parties and more defense of popular sovereignty. And we're lucky to have a member of the Italian Parliament, Georgia, to talk a little bit about what's going on in Europe and the rise of populist parties that are trying to reclaim their countries, their voters' sovereignty.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me. This is a great honor for me to stand on this stage today as an Italian, as a European, and discuss with the American Conservative Union issues that are crucial for the future of us all. First of all, in this debate on democracy in Europe and in Venezuela, I would like to share with you that the party I lead, Fratelli d'Italia, is on the front lines in supporting the cause of liberty for the Venezuelan people against the communist dictator Maduro. We have brought the protest of democracy-loving Venezuelans, including a sizable community of Italian origin, into the Italian parliament, and we have tried to push the Italian government to adopt a clear position in support of Guaidó and the constitutional rule of law. Unfortunately, the Italian government remains hostage to some of its ideologically left-wing members, and it has adopted a neutral position on the Venezuelan crisis. This is a grave and unacceptable attitude that we have forcefully denounced, because we cannot remain neutral between freedom and tyranny. Never. And the heirs of Greek and Roman culture should know this better than anyone. My mind goes to Julius Caesar, the tragedy so masterfully told by Shakespeare of the Romans who decided to murder the greatest among them, Caesar, for he had planned to proclaim himself emperor and tyrant and thus betray the values of freedom and the Republic. All of us, Italians, European, Westerns, we are the descendants of that greatness. We should never forget it. And that happens in Venezuela, of course, and in Europe as well, where we are fighting another battle for freedom, one that is less dramatic yet equally vital for our peoples, and it is the battle against European Union's anti-democratic drift. Until a few years ago, countries were willing to do whatever it took to join the European club. Why are so many now considering leaving, something the United Kingdom has already done? And why are there ever more movements, such as the one I lead, that call for a restoration of national sovereignty and a reduced role for the European Union? We discussed this a few days ago in Rome during the summit of the Alliance of Conservatives and Reformers in Europe, whose delegation should be here. I greet and thank them. And the answer we gave is a simple one. The crisis of the European Union is a crisis of democracy and popular sovereignty. The European democratic system is based on national states. It is at this level that the people elect their representatives. But decision-making powers in the economic, monetary, and legislative spheres are increasingly less in the hands of nation-states and increasingly more in those of European bureaucrats, even though they have no democratic legitimacy. Democracy in Europe has become a sham. Citizens vote for institutions that have no decision-making powers, while they have no say in the functioning of the institutions that truly hold the levers of power in the old continent. The European Parliament is elected, of course, but unfortunately it is the one with less powers in all European institutions. This supernatural, undemocratic entity imposed upon European nations the choices of nihilistic globalist elites driven by international finance, untrammeled immigration to destroy European identities and import a cheap labor force, austerity policies that have weakened the real economy and strengthened financial speculators, globalism without rules that damages local productions and labor and favors multinational corporations, and the systematic destruction of the founding values of our civilization. This is what the European Union has become. And this is the European Union against which the people are rebelling, not against the European people's desire for a union. And the final clash will come in the upcoming European elections in May. Europe against Europe. Our Europe, with its Greek, Roman, and Christian roots, versus the Europe of Macron and Merkel, of those who want to cede even more national sovereignty to European technocrats, of those who misquote American history to make grand proclamation about a United States of Europe. They don't know what they're talking about. What makes America great is that you created a great national framework with great patriotism while making the most of your diversity. Those who instead want to impose the United States of Europe on us, they want to destroy our identity and our civilization to turn us into undefined citizens of the world and model consumers. To those who want a United States of Europe, we say we want a united Europe of states. A great confederation of free and sovereign nation states who can work together on a range of major issues: immigration, security, single market, defense, foreign policy, but enjoy self-determination in all matters that are best decided upon the national or local level. This is the model that so many patriotic and conservative movements are working on, tearing down this European Union to save the union of European nations and return to the peoples of Europe the sovereignty that has been usurped by technocrats and bureaucrats in the service of the globalist worldview. This is the same battle that the American Conservative Union has been fighting for years in the United States, and that is why I'm very proud of being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. And we really, really wish all the best for our ideological cousins in Europe as they continue their struggle. And what better way than those remarks to lead into our discussion of Brexit. We have an awesome panel here of experts to talk about some various situations where people around the world are seeking to reclaim their sovereignty. Everybody knows Brexit is the name for the British voters' exit from the European Union. The vote occurred 2.5 years ago. And yet, if you look at the headlines today in London, you see it just full of acrimony and discord, continuing about Brexit, and people still fighting vehemently to prevent Britain from leaving the EU. And I wanted to turn to Niall. Niall, can you give us a state of play, if you will, as to why 2.5 years we are still in an inconclusive situation regarding the exit of Britain from the EU?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting us all here today. It's a great pleasure to be here at CPAC. My former boss, Margaret Thatcher, would have loved CPAC, actually. And it's wonderful to have seen over the past 2 to 3 days 10,000 conservative activists who are fighting for a free America. And Margaret Thatcher, as Prime Minister, defeated socialism in Britain. And American conservatives here in the United States must defeat socialism in America as well. And CPAC, I think, is a vital part of that. On the subject of Brexit, I had the privilege of working with Lady Thatcher in the final years of her public life. And she wrote a book called Statecraft back in 2002, where she talked about Britain leaving the European Union. And in June 2016, 17.4 million Britons voted to leave the EU. They voted because they believe in sovereignty and self-determination and freedom. And that's what Brexit is all about. And Britain's parliament actually voted for Britain to leave the European Union on March 29th this year. And that was the pledge made by Parliament to the British people based upon the biggest ever democratic vote in British history. Unfortunately, there are forces within Parliament, forces within Great Britain, but also forces in Europe who are trying to stop Brexit and derail Brexit. And it is vitally important that Brexit takes place, because Brexit is a tremendous blow in favor of freedom, a tremendous blow against the European elites, who frankly do not believe in democracy, who do not believe in sovereignty and self-determination. And so Brexit is this massive game changer in Europe. It is a huge strike against this idea of a European superstate. And so the British people have voted for their freedom, and in my view, Parliament must deliver the will of the British people. Unfortunately, at this stage, we are in a bit of an impasse. March 12th, there is going to be a vote in Parliament on Theresa May's deal with the European Union, which I believe is a very poor deal for Great Britain. This is a deal that would keep Britain tied into the EU customs union indefinitely, which means that Britain cannot negotiate its own free trade agreements, including with the United States. I expect that her deal is going to be voted down in Parliament. March 13th, there's going to be a vote on a no-deal Brexit, which I think would be the ideal situation for Britain. After all, Britain is the world's fifth largest economy in the world. It's a great power on the world stage, and Britain can do very well outside of the EU under a no deal. Unfortunately, large numbers of MPs are likely to vote against a no deal scenario, and then on March 14th, there will be a vote on extending Article 50 of the European Union Treaty, which means that Britain will not be leaving on March 29th. In my view, any delay to Brexit is a slap in the face for the British people. It would be an act against the democratic will of the British people. And those who are pushing to extend Article 50 or to delay Brexit wish to overturn Brexit. We cannot allow that to happen. And we must ensure that Brexit takes place. And Brexit is great for Britain, it's great for Europe, it's great for America as well. Brexit will lead to a stronger special relationship with the United States. And with very good reason, President Trump has given his whole 100% wholehearted support to Brexit. And as the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said, Brexit is a real wake-up call to Europe and to the world. And so the American people must stand with the British people in support of Brexit and help the British people to deliver Brexit. And above all, it is the spirit of freedom that unites the British and the American people together. And so Brexit is a truly great development. It really matters for American conservatives as well.
Thank you, Niall. If I may turn to Raheem, as Niall eloquently points out, the British people went to the polls and made a sovereign decision to leave the European Union. And yet, we understand, obviously, from Niall's comments, a remaining sentiment, not only in the UK, but also that supra-state that exists in Brussels is making the departure of the UK from the EU a very complicated, drawn-out problem. So isn't this a self-indictment of the EU itself for attempting to coerce the UK to stay in the EU, despite the sovereign decision of the people.
Yeah, look, the European Union is basically the abusive partner in a relationship here. You know, one side wants to leave and the other one keeps dragging it back and trying to tell it why it can't and guilting it and threatening it and so on and so forth. I think what Niall said is obviously important about the sovereignty issue and the liberty issues, but there was one thing Niall left out, and it was the key pillar of the Brexit vote as far as I'm concerned, and that was immigration, and that was border control. That's what people want. They want their country back, okay? And just like how on November the 8th, 2016, you guys voted to build that wall, you guys voted to drain that swamp, we have institutions the very same way. Call it the deep state, call it the in-your-face state, call it whatever you want. We have institutions, think tanks, the media, the civil service, functionaries, bureaucrats, trying to stop that happening. So it's not just the EU's intransigence that's stopping this from happening. It's actually our own government that is stopping this from happening. You know, as Niall said, the largest democratic mandate in British political history. You know, I was the only one, of two people who was in the official Trump victory party in Midtown Manhattan and the official Brexit party when we voted to leave the European Union. And we didn't vote to kind of soft Brexit. Like you didn't vote to have Trump in the White House, but have, you know, the 9th District Circuit Court of Appeals or whatever it is, decide what government policy is in this country. And so we have to now make sure that we get our votes stuck to. And how do we do it? Because the EU will always try and stop member states from leaving. It will collapse if it didn't do that. So you can see it's in its own vested interest to do that. What we need to do, and I wish Niall was right, by the way, when he said that Margaret Thatcher defeated socialism. I'm afraid Margaret Thatcher deferred socialism, right? We have a socialistic government, which is a conservative government in name only in the United Kingdom. We have to get rid of those people. We have to drain our own swamp in Westminster and in the United Kingdom, right? And I am, despite my waistcoat right now, I am a huge Americophile, okay? I think there are just so many lessons that we can learn from right here, and that's why I relish coming to CPAC, and I relish coming here, and this is my 10th one in a row, actually. And thank you. They still let me come. And it's about finding that spirit of liberty that has been sucked out of the British people, replaced with welfarism, replaced with the idea that your reliance and your deference is to the state and the state only, not to your communities, not to your families, etc., etc. And really, that's what the Brexit vote was about. Taking back control means you exercise control, means you and your neighbors and your communities and your families exercise control. And I think that's the conversation that we're not having enough of. And I do want to end my remarks on saying this. I am so bleeding grateful to President Donald J. Trump for extending the hand of friendship, for saying that we will give you a trade deal. We'll give you the biggest, most beautiful trade deal. He's said it. He's on the record. I wish my country would accept it and we can work together as a special relationship, transatlantic partners once again.
Thank you, Raheem. Well said. I think the prospects of a US-UK free trade agreement would certainly be very much a global game changer. Wanted to turn our attention to a somewhat of a slightly different situation. As Ms. Maloney was talking about the situation in Venezuela, where we have a socialist authoritarian government attempting to crush the last vestige of liberty in that important country. Now, this is something, but what we have is a civil society in Venezuela that is fighting tooth and nail to prevent that. And I wanted to ask Joseph if you could tell us what is the current state of play then between a situation where we have the head of the National Assembly, the head of the legislature, Juan Guaido, who has constitutionally assumed the role of president, fighting against the regime of Nicolás Maduro, who is backed by Cuba, Russia, and China. And this is a country that is a couple of hours plane flight from Miami.
No, absolutely. And first, let me just say thank you to Matt Schlapp and Dan Schneider, not just for having one panel where we talk about Venezuela, but actually two panels. We had a panel yesterday that was a very good panel on talking about the external influences in Venezuela. What everyone needs to understand is that in Venezuela, the free will of the Venezuelan people has been subordinated, not even to just Nicolas Maduro. The free will of the Venezuelan people has been subordinated to external actors, to Cuban intelligence agents, to Russian mercenaries, to Iranian Quds Force operatives. And these external actors are destabilizing Venezuela to the point that they're challenging the concept of sovereignty. What everyone's not looking at is the internal situation in Venezuela is dire. Economically, they're in catastrophe. Violence is on the rise. But what everyone's not looking at is the number of refugees. We're at 3.5 million refugees in Venezuela. They're spilling out all over Latin America. And that's the most important point, because what that is designed to do, which is very much a strategy on behalf of the Maduro regime and its external actors, is to push out more refugees so that they can challenge the borders. There are border wars happening all over Latin America between Venezuela and Colombia, Venezuela and Brazil, Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And what these border wars are designed to do is to challenge the concept of sovereignty, because they know that if they can blur the border, they can blur the concept of a sovereign nation state and therefore take the legitimacy away. And that's one of the things I think that's on the forefront of what Russia, Iran, and China, and more recently Turkey, are trying to do in Latin America. And I have to say honestly that President Trump has been on this since day one. Mm-hmm. And I know that for a fact because during the transition, before he was actually inaugurated as president, they asked me to come in to talk about Venezuela because they knew that this was going to get here. They knew it was going to get that bad, and they wanted to strategize on a potential solution. And I think where we're at right now, we're at an inflection point. There's no gray space. There's no room for ambiguity anymore. The world has to decide. Are they going to recognize the official, constitutional, legitimate president of Juan Guaido? Or are they going to continue back a dictator that's violating human rights and challenging sovereignty throughout the region? There's no more room for ambiguous governments, ambiguous decisions, and I think we have to be consistent about those alliances and those decisions that we make. So I commend President Trump for being vocal on this, for putting it on the agenda, for advocating for the free will of the Venezuelan people, and doing so even at a point where the last administration completely destroyed our relations in Latin America to the point that we got here. If you think about Barack Obama's foreign policy legacy, it was two big deals, many other things, but two big deals. A rekindling of diplomatic relations with Cuba and a nuclear deal with Iran. And who paid the price for those two foreign policy blunders? The people of Venezuela. And I think that's what we have to see, and that's what we have to work on in Venezuela.
I think that you make a very make such a good point, Joseph, is that I know that we as a country have a very strong debate about U.S. overextension abroad. How many hotspots should we get involved in? But I think when you think about a country in our own hemisphere, as I said, a couple of hours flight from Miami, this is a country which not only is supported by Russia, China, and Cuba, but also by narco-traffickers. As Venezuela has destroyed its oil industry, once one of the world's strongest, it is relying more and more on facilitating drug trafficking where? To the United States. So this is a problem for the United States, and not a military problem, but a diplomatic and security problem that, again, as Joseph said, that the Trump administration has taken on full bore, and we all obviously pray for a peaceful transition or any kind of transition so that the Venezuelan people recover their sovereignty. I wanted to jump back to the issue of the populist movement worldwide. And what we have seen is the entrenched elites, the vested interests, have tried to pejoratize words like nationalism and populism. So, but those are not bad aspects of our nature. We have attachments to our national identity and to our culture. And so does every other people around the world. And what we're seeing, are we not, is almost an attempt at social engineering at the international level to try to root out those important aspects of our human identity. So as you see the sources of discontent that are fueling this populist movement abroad, Niall, how do you see the future of the European Union?
Well, that's a great question, a very important question, and there's no doubt about it. The winds of change are blowing across Europe. And all over Europe, I think that political movements, European publics are challenging the traditional ruling European elites, and they want change. And we're seeing that in practically every major European country today. And let's make this very clear. I think the left in the United States would like to turn America into a version of the European Union. Socialism, big government, high taxes, open borders. This is the agenda of the far left here in America. And that's exactly what you have in Europe today. You have these unaccountable elites who do not respect national sovereignty, who have no respect for borders either. And you've seen the catastrophic results of that in countries such as Germany, for example, which opened up its borders to 2 million migrants or refugees, and leading to a significant upscale in terrorist attacks in Germany. And I think that the ruling elites in the EU today are delusional, frankly. And a prime example of that is Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who constantly sneers at the United States, who also calls Brexit a crime. And recently, Emmanuel Macron called for the creation of a European Union army. He said to challenge not only the Chinese and the Russians, but also to stand up to the United States. An incredible statement by the French president. And I would remind Mr. Macron of the fact that American soldiers and British soldiers gave their lives in large numbers so that France could be free, so that Europe could be free. The French, the Germans, whose leaders are all lecturing America today, who are sneering at the United States today, they owe their freedom to the sacrifices made by the American people. And my message to all American conservatives here at CPAC and across America would be, never give up your freedom. Do not allow the United States to turn into another version of the European Union. Because once you give up your freedom, it's very hard to retake it. You have to fight to defend that freedom. You have to fight to defeat socialism. And the EU today, led by Mr. Macron, Angela Merkel, the EU is a basket case. It is declining. It is basically, it worships at the ideal of big government. Mm-hmm. It is a socialist vanity project. Never allow that to happen here in America. Fight to keep your freedom, defend your borders, and defend your sovereignty and self-determination.
Well said. Rahim, you spent a lot of time traveling through Europe, and you've seen the rise of these center-right populist movements that are essentially trying to do what Niall just articulated, and that is to basically to push back against this supranational state and reclaim their sovereignty. So what is as the EU heads to elections in May, as I understand, these these parties, their chances of success of growing and you know, getting a hold of the political trajectory in the European Union?
Well, they've already got it in a lot of ways. You know, in Hungary, you've got a very strong government. In Poland, you've got a very strong right-wing government. In Austria, obviously, we had our Brexit vote. You know, these winds of change that Niall speaks of are already well across the continent now. So there is hope for sovereignty and identity and the idea of nationhood and border control to be restored. But we have to also understand where this attack is coming from. Because it's not just about the elites wanting to be elite. It's not just about them wanting to drive nice cars and fly their private jets. It's also about the destruction of the family. You know, cultural Marxism has come up because Marxism failed to win in the 1980s, right? Cultural Marxism, the attack on personhood, the attack on life, the attack on individuality, and the attack on communities is simply their way of making sure that they can then, once they destroy those things, impose their economic agenda. And if we don't understand that, and believe me, you have it, it's so close to taking control right here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Bernie, I can't hear you, what? Bernie Sanders. But it's so very close. Don't think that just because Trump won in 2016 that it's a fait accompli in 2020 and that you keep ruling the roost. We have to work hard every single day, or you know what, as Niall said, you'll end up like us. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
In the time we have left, I wanted to go back to Joseph. There's another country in our own hemisphere that also made a great break against a socialist control. And that is Brazil, the largest country in Latin America. Joseph, what do you think the chances are of the new president to break that stranglehold in Brazil?
He's doing it. President Jair Bolsonaro had a very Brexit moment in Brazil. Nobody expected him to win. His political party had never won an election. He was not even very well known earlier the same year when he won late last year in the election in Brazil. And he's leading a conservative movement in his country, and he has the potential to lead a conservative movement all throughout Latin America that's tied to family values, that's tied to the evangelical communities. And it's increasingly important because what the enemies of freedom are trying to do in Latin America, all the folks that we've been talking about on the panel today, is they are weaponizing the people in need. They are using vulnerable people to be able to establish conditions that are going to create destabilization throughout entire Latin America to delegitimize the United States. You cannot make America great again unless you have the Americas great again. And I think that's something that we all have to understand.
Great. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a fascinating discussion. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please join me in a round of applause.